Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to be here with you tonight for our October Banned Book Club, where we will be discussing the book, The Girl Who Fell from the Sky by Heidi Durrow. If this is your first time with us, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Red, Wine, and Blue. We're a national community of over 500,000 suburban women working together to defeat extremism in our local communities. In addition to our Banned Book Club, we also host weekly educational events and interviews. Our sweep salons on Tuesday nights and our troublemaker trainings, where we teach women like you and me how to organize our friends and neighbors and take action in our communities. We're now on our 4th year of our Banned Book Club, and together we've read so many banned and challenged books, and we've barely even made a dent in the list. According to the American Library Association, already this year, there are at least 112 proposed state bills concerning school and public libraries that seek to expand the definition of what is deemed obscene or harmful to minors and to limit librarian staff's ability to determine which books are in their collections. So you're taking such an important step in standing up to censorship by being a part of our Banned Book Club and reading these books. So thank you very much for being here. So our book tonight is by Heidi Durrow. She's a New York Times bestselling author, and she received the writer Barbara Kingsolver's 2008 Penn Bellwether Prize for this book, The Girl Who Fell from the Sky. And it's already a book club favorite. The Girl Who Fell from the Sky has been hailed as one of the best novels of 2010 by the Washington Post, a top 10 book of 2010 by the Oregonian, a top 10 buzz book of 2010 by the Boston Herald, and named a top 10 debut of 2010 by Booklist. Ebony Magazine named Heidi as one of its Power 100 leaders of 2010, along with writers Edwidge Danticat and Malcolm Gladwell. Heidi was nominated for a 2011 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Debut. Since its publication, it has been banned or challenged numerous times. One example is in 2022 when The Girl Who Fell from the Sky was listed among 52 books banned by the Alpine School District following the implementation of Utah's Law HB 374, Sensitive Materials in Schools. The book has been challenged because of the suicide and sexual stories in the book. So now we're going to bring on our guest. I'm very, very excited to have my husband, Leo, with us tonight. Leo Collins is an educator and a Coast Guard veteran, originally from Compton, California. He lost his mom as a toddler and was raised by his grandmother and step-grandfather. Leo graduated from the Coast Guard Academy with a degree in mechanical engineering. We met in 2016. We got married in 2019, and we live in the Central Ohio area, and we have together 4 adult children. So welcome, Leo.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to just go ahead and get into this because I know that you have limited time tonight.
Yeah,
The character Rachel in the book, she lost her mom and almost dies herself. And so then she moves to Portland, Oregon to live with her grandma. And she learns about being Black from her father's family and the kids at school. Now, you lost your mom when you were younger. You were a toddler, and you were raised by your grandmother in Compton, California. We talked a little bit about this last night. How do you think that shaped, like your identity and who you were?
I would say, it did a great deal, and especially the environment did a great deal in shaping, who I was then. Of course, as time goes on, you find your place in life and, you come to grips with certain things and you move on, but during probably that time period, it was definitely pretty difficult for me.
So in the book, Rachel, she's light skinned with blue eyes, but you're light skinned with green eyes. And in the book, her classmates told her she wasn't all that and felt she was stuck up. What did you experience in school because of your looks?
Well, I mean, it wasn't too much about my eyes. It was just about the whole package, growing up in the 60s, right after, the Watts riots, being anything other than brown skin or dark skin, you were kind of seen as, the enemy. It was a big thing, about hate whitey, and it was a whole different time period. So, being a biracial child, you always felt that you did measure up because, of course, you were around, other Black kids, and you're a Black kid, and you felt that you should measure up, but You don't because of the color of your skin.
Mhm. I can understand that. Even having two Black parents, but being fair skinned, I experienced some of that too in elementary school. In the book, the character, she misses her mom. And at the same time, she tries to understand what happened on the roof of their apartment building that day. And grief is not expressly discussed. Now, you and I both have lost our mothers when we were very young, but you were a toddler when your mom passed away. How do you think grief shaped your identity?
I, you know, being that young, I really didn't have, the time to grieve or to even know, what grieving actually was. I guess my grieving came from my grandmother's grieving, and her grief was transmitted to me, by her being overly protective. Now, she thought she was being overly protective, but I think we discussed, when I was a teenager, I was actually sneaking the car out of the garage. What I would do, late at night, I could get out the house late at night and I'd go into the garage, lift the garage door up, push the car out into the alley, push it down the street a little bit. It was a small car. It was a Ford Falcon, so it was a fairly small car. And I wouldn't start the car until I got halfway down the block. Now, the process was reversed on bringing the car in. I'd park the car at the end of the alley. I'd run down because we lived in the middle of the block. I'd run down, lift the garage door up, uh, start the car, go down, back down, start the car, get a good run, cut the car engine off, put it in neutral, and bring it right into the garage. Okay.
Well,
They were
she
none the
was
wiser.
she was
Only
strict on
thing
you for a reason, I'm guessing. But
was that?
I said she was strict on you for a reason, I'm
Yes,
guessing.
yes, because I was extremely sneaky. I could maneuver my way out of things, which, definitely helped later on in life.
But she also restricted you from doing some things that you did want to do, like music, right?
Music. I was brought up, within the classical guitar. She paid for lessons. I mean, she was really invested into this. Little did I know, it was just kind of for her own enjoyment. She wanted me to learn how to play for her enjoyment, and maybe when friends came over, I would entertain them. Uh, but as things went, I eventually got pretty good, and I had an audition with a group, and that group was a major mainstream jazz group. The group was the Crusaders. I auditioned. There was me and another guy. The other guy was Larry Carlton. If you're into jazz, you would know who these people are. And they were worried about me because I was 16 at the time, so they had to go through my grandmother. They had to get the consent thing. And she kind of looked at the man, his name was Joe Sample, and he was, famous, huge entertainer. And she looked at him and said, "Not on your life. He's not going anywhere with you."
Mhm.
And that was
And
it. And after
explain to
that,
folks why.
huh?
Why was she like that? Explain.
Because my mother got involved in show business and she lost her life, because she got into the drug end of show business, which at that particular time, and we're talking about people like Red Fox, drugs were pretty rampant in the show business industry. Don't know if it's changed much now, but back then it was a thing. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so
So,
that was her way of protecting me.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit about how when I was in DC a couple of weeks ago, someone, mistakenly thought that you were not Black, but you identify as a Black man. Um, but you have been mistaken many times in your life for being white. When you were growing up, did you realize you were biracial, or we talked about the term mixed?
Correct. Yes. When you say, "Oh, well, did you know you're biracial?" Well, yeah. Now the term is, but it wasn't. That wasn't a term that we used then. We used mixed. You were
Hmm.
mixed. And then the next question was always, "What are you mixed with?" So
Hmm.
that's how that was
So then after high school,
investigated.
you went into the military, you went into the Coast Guard Academy, and you were
Correct.
actually able to attend flight school and become a pilot because initially the folks in charge of making those decisions didn't know that you were black. So
That's very true.
so how did that make you feel? On the one hand, you're being given a tremendous opportunity, but on the other, you had to deny who you were to get it.
Well, it kind of it had to start out with, first of all, you had to be very protective of who you were. You could not freely associate with, of course, your classmates or people you were going to school with because you didn't want to let on that you were something other than what you were,
Hmm.
So, and as far as flight school was concerned, um, it was kind of, I guess I would say it's the Coast Guard's fault. They really didn't investigate where I was recruited from. I was actually recruited from Inglewood. So, Inglewood was kind of a mixed race town at that time. So Compton and Watts never came up. So nobody was ever the wiser.
Hmm. And so then you told me a funny story last night about one of your, I guess, superiors who called back to the flight school because
Right. It,
he
it
was
was my first
concerned.
first duty station, Brooklyn Air Station. Flight school at that time was in Mobile, Alabama. So you can imagine, in the late 70s, early 80s, Mobile, Alabama. And what actually happened, I had been assigned to Brooklyn Air Station, been there for about 3 or 4 months, and the commanding officer kind of always kind of looked at me side eye. And he just, one day he said, "You are not what you seem to be." So I said, "Well, who do you think I am?" And after that, he just left it and, never said anything. So I had learned later from his administrative assistant that he actually called the Mobile, Alabama about me and asked and they were friends, by the way. They had went to the academy together. They had attained rank at the same time. They were close friends. So he actually asked him. He said, "What are we doing now? Are we graduating black pilots?" And the guy in Mobile, Alabama said, "Oh, no, we are not doing that here." And little did he know. Now, I told you later on in life, he actually found out that I was a black pilot because, once I had attained a little rank, there was very little they could do.
Hmm.
So, I was there.
And
That
they had
first
invested all
year,
that.
yeah, I had to play the game. But after
Hmm.
the second, third, fourth, especially after the fourth and fifth year, and I had to go back to be retrained on another aircraft. So that's when this person found out he was still there. And he didn't have a word to say to me. Nothing. Anything that came from him came from somebody else. So
Wow. Wow. So the book takes place in the 80s, but
Mhm.
you grew up in the 60s and 70s. Do you think the experience of being biracial was different, especially since you were born 9 years before the Loving decision?
Oh, my God, yes, it was different because in the 80s, the biracial thing kind of mellowed out a little bit, I would say. I want to use that term, mellowed out, because it was a real thing back in the 60s and 70s. Um, I mean, I guess without too much self-disclosure, it was actually against the law at one time, as
Hmm.
probably a lot of people know. So, you know, my father was never put on my birth certificate. I
Mhm.
was told who he was. I was shown a picture of who he was. But as far as be able to verify he's not on my birth certificate,
Mhm.
father unknown. So
Mhm.
that was to protect me, from being taken, probably protect my mother from going to jail. Who knows?
Mhm. Mhm. Wow. Well, I thank you for coming and sharing about growing up, being mixed, biracial, and how your identity was formed, because that's what largely this book is about. And like I said, I didn't want to hold you too terribly long because I know that you have to get back to what you were doing.
Right. I don't
Um,
want my students to blow anything up over there.
yeah, he teaches welding, y'all.
But
Uh,
anyway, it being biracial, I guess I would say, one of the questions was, how did you feel about it? How did you feel about using, being biracial to get where you needed to get? I felt perfectly fine about it. I felt that the ends justified the means
mhm,
because without that, I would have been driving a ship somewhere, and I didn't want to do that.
mhm,
I didn't want to, I wanted to be in the Air Corps. That's what I wanted to do. There was just no turning back. It was one of those things heard people, it's that or nothing. Well, that's
mhm,
what it was for me after I got acclimated just to being in the service, because that
mhm,
was a huge undertaking for the
mhm.
first 2 years. I plotted every means of escape, all to spend 15 years,
Yeah.
serving my country. So go figure.
All right. Well, thank you, honey, and I will see
All
you
right.
later
Thank you
when
for
you come
having
home.
me. I appreciate it.